In this video, we are going to discuss 5 critical chess traps in Queen's Gambit variation opening, and these 5 diagrams or chess traps can help you to improve your chess level skills and game and score some heavy chess points in the tournaments or in club level or against your friend. So it's going to be a very extremely critical video to improve your chess. So now let's quickly check it out. So coming to the trap number 1, we are playing with the white pieces and we start the game with 1d4. The Queen's Gambit always begins with first 1d4. Our opponent replies with d5 and we play the move c4. And whenever you are facing a beginner, he will every time go for capturing material. So in this position, he will definitely go for capturing a free pawn by capturing the c4 pawn. And after t into c4, we play the move e3. Our idea is to simply capture the c4 pawn back. But as a beginner, every player will most likely to play the move b5 in order to defend the pawn on c4. And it is a very natural move. You are defending the pawn and you are a pawn up. So after playing b5, we are going to respond by playing the move a4, trying to undermine the pawn on b5. If he tries to capture the a4 pawn, we are happy to capture the a4 pawn and give a check, and eventually we will capture the c4 pawn on the next move, equalizing the material, and the a7 and the c7 pawn are extremely weak. We are having the open a file and we can already sense that we are already better in this position. So capturing the a4 pawn is not a good idea. If we try to push the b4 pawn, I can simply capture the c4 pawn. So here black plays the move c6. If black tries to play the move a6, we are happy to capture the b5 pawn, as black cannot capture the pawn because the rook is simply hanging. So at the place of a6, black will most likely to play the move c6. And after c6, we will simply capture the pawn on b5. After c into b5, we play the move queen to f3. The idea is simply capture the rook, and black can't really help it, but the best move is to play the move knight c6, and eventually black loses the piece, and we are completely winning the game. So this is the trap number 1, which you must know whenever you are playing a Queen's Gambit opening. So this is the trap number 1, so now let's move on to the trap number 2. So coming on to the trap number 2, we are playing with the white pieces. We start the game with 1d4. Our opponent replies with d5. We play the move c4. And here black captures the pawn on c4 again. e3 trying to capture the c4 pawn. And here, instead of playing the move b5 as we have already discussed, our opponent plays the move knight f6, giving the pawn back. And now playing the move g6. His idea is to simply develop the bishop and simply short castle. Knight to f3. Bishop to g7, and here we are going to set some dangerous traps. We play the move queen to a4 check. And after queen to a4 check, here black is having many options to continue the game. But black needs to be very precise if it does not want to play the wrong move. For example, if black plays the obvious move, which is bishop d7, trying to hit the white queen. Here we can already play the move queen to b3, trying to simply capture the f7 pawn and also attacking the b7 pawn. So already you can sense how black is going to lose a pawn in the next move. So bishop to d7 is not a good idea. So let's take a move like queen to d7, trying to trade off the queens. After queen d7, it's a big blunder because here comes the move bishop into f7 check. If black kings move, then we are already simply a pawn up. We can simply trade the queen and pull the bishop back. So the best would be to capture the bishop. But now comes knight to e5 check. And on the next move, black loses the queen and eventually the game. So definitely queen to d7 is also not the best idea. If we talk about knight to c6, we can already play the move knight to e5. And we are attacking the f7 pawn simultaneously the knight on c6 by the queen and the knight. So you can already sense that we are going to be a pawn up in the next move. So now let's try to discuss knight to d7. After knight d7, we can again capture the pawn on f7 with a check. King takes, and now comes the move knight to g5 check. If king goes to e8, we can simply put the knight to e6, and the queen is trapped, and we can win the game. If the king goes to f8, we can still play the move knight e6, it's a check, and the queen is hanging. So the fourth move for black is to go to g8, but now comes the move queen to c4 check. Black is forced to move the king, and now comes the move queen to f7 checkmate. So now you can already sense that every move looks like a blunder. So the best move here for black is to play the move c6. After c6, black is preparing to play the move b5. So we simply pull the queen back to b3. attacking the f7 pawn. And after short castle, we can also short castle. b5, bishop e2. And the basic idea here is, after bishop b7 simply trying to develop the piece, we can already play the move a4, trying to undermine the queen side, because we can already sense that black has overextended a bit on the queen side, so we will take advantage by pushing the pawn on a4, trying to open up our rook, and trying to get some good amount of play. So practically speaking, it's a good idea to play from the white side. So this is how you can play this particular trap. So this was the trap number 2, so now let's move on to the trap number 3. So coming to the trap number 3, we are playing with the black pieces, and our opponent starts the game with 1d4. We play the move knight f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, d5, bishop to g5. Very natural move, pinning up the knight. We play the move knight to d7, trying to be a bit tricky. After knight d7, if our opponent is a bit experienced and he likes to calculate, he will most likely try to capture the pawn, and after pawn takes, he will think that he can simply capture the pawn with the knight, thinking that we cannot capture the knight because we are simply losing the queen. But surprisingly, after this position landed, when your opponent is simply smiling up that he has won your queen, you can now play the move bishop to b4 check. And surprisingly, white is having the force move to put the queen in between in order to stop the checkmate. We can simply capture the queen followed by the piece, and eventually you can sense we are simply a piece up. We are having 3 minor pieces against 2 minor pieces, and we are winning the game. This was the trap number 3, so now let's move on to the trap number 4. Coming to the trap number 4, we are playing with the black pieces, and white starts the game with 1d4. We play the move knight f6, c4, e6, and many players in the chess community or in the chess world likes to play the move either of knight f3 or knight c3. It doesn't really matter, because if we play the move knight f3, we play the move d5, knight to c3, we play the move knight to d7, bishop to g5, and here we play the move c6. Now what's the idea? For example, if white plays the move e3, which is the best move and the most natural move, you're opening up the bishop and you want to castle. Here we will already surprise our opponent by playing the move queen to a5. Like basically we are breaking the principle of developing the queen early. But the basic idea of queen a5 here is we are pinning up the knight, and our idea is to play the move knight to e4, hitting this knight again, and bishop b4, hitting this knight again. So practically speaking, it's a bit dangerous if your opponent doesn't know how to react to it. After queen a5, for example, if white continues simply like bishop to d3, which is the most common move, you are trying to develop your pieces. After bishop d3, we are simply developing our knight to e4. The idea is to simply capture the knight. So if white tries to capture the knight after pawn takes, we are hitting the knight, as well as if the knight tries to move, like for example the g1, white is already losing up the bishop. So here the best move for white is to play the move knight e5, takes, pawn takes, and surprisingly you cannot capture the pawn because it's a mate in 1. So you must try to avoid it. So after pawn takes, you can simply play the move h6 first, because now there is no longer mate because the queen is defending the square. Bishop goes back, you develop the bishop in order to capture the knight. Short castle, takes checks, you still can't capture the pawn because it's mate in 1. So trying to be safe, you simply castle now, and you can already sense white is having such a bad pawn structure. He's having 2 pawns, double pawns on the c file, a single isolated pawn on the a file, and a weak pawn on e file. White can continue the best play by playing the move queen d4, but I like this particular play by black by playing the move b6, sacrificing 2 pawns, and now getting some good counterplay by rook c8, hitting the queen, queen goes back, we capture the e5 pawn, and eventually both the pawns are going to be dead, and black would be the one taking control of the game because he's having queenside majority in the end, so he would be the one in the future to push the game. So yeah, this was the trap number 4. If you want a complete detailed analysis of this particular variation, I have already uploaded a video. So coming to back to this variation, what if white continues the game after knight e4 if white plays the move queen to c2? Not capturing the knight, but putting more pressure on the knight, and also defending the knight. So here after queen c2, we are simply going to capture the bishop, knight takes, and after pawn takes, we are hitting the bishop as well as the knight. So now white is forced to give up a piece, and eventually after bishop c4 we can simply capture the piece and we are a piece up and eventually going to win the game. So this was the trap number 4. So now let's move on to the trap number 5, the final trap of the day. Coming to the trap number 5, the final trap of the day, we are playing with the black pieces and our opponent starts the game with 1d4. We play the move d5, c4 and we surprise our opponent already by playing the move e5. Sacrificing the e5 pawn, and now we are going to push the d4 pawn. And our opponent must be thinking that the d4 pawn is a bit annoying. White must be thinking that I cannot develop my knight to c3 because the d4 pawn is strong. So let's do a thing. Let's try to remove this d4 pawn by pushing the pawn to e3. After e3, this is exactly what I wanted, what we wanted. And now we are going to play the move bishop to b4 check. It's a check, so white must play the move bishop d2, thinking that let's try to trade off the bishop and eventually the material, and we are having a good position. We are a pawn up. But after bishop d2, we are not going to capture the bishop, but simply going to capture the pawn on e3. White cannot capture the pawn on e3 because the bishop is pinned. So white must be thinking, let's try to capture the bishop, it's a free piece. After bishop takes, we are going to capture the pawn, giving a check. If white tries to capture the pawn, we can already capture the queen and win the game. So the best move is to put the king to e2. And now white must be thinking, okay, so black will try to capture the knight, make queen. We'll try to trade off the rooks, try to capture this, and the position is even, nothing is happening. But for our opponent's surprise, after king e2, we are going to capture the knight and make a knight and give a check. So white is kind of forced to capture the knight, and now comes play bishop to g4 check, hitting the queen, king have to move, and now we can simply capture the queen and eventually win the game. So this was the 5th trap, a very interesting one. So these were the 5 critical traps that you must know in the Queen's Gambit whenever you are playing this particular opening or you're playing against this opening. So I hope that you liked the video. If you liked it, then make sure to like the video. Share this video with everyone and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you are new to our channel, because we are going to come up with these interesting videos like this. If you want any particular video on any particular topic, you can just comment me down in the comment box below. I'm going to definitely reply to you and make a video on it. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching Oneshot Chess.